Hello everybody and welcome back! I am the Pompkin King, and in today's episode we're going to be continuing our playthrough of Planet Coaster Pure Imagination, Pure Steam. In the previous episode we launched ourselves headfirst into our new node, and we started building a few architectural structures. Since that time I have been doing a bit more research as to the Victorian architecture and steampunk architecture in general. And now I have a pretty decent idea as to what all I wanted to do. Now, last time I remember I mentioned that I wanted to add some verticality to our builds. So I'm going to be trying to build in some tall elements coming forward that we can work into the park to make it feel more like a steampunk city. And here I am actually doing exactly that. I am making a Gothic type tower, which is going to be part of a food court eventually that we can use to serve a variety of different foods. For this particular build, I was using inspiration for this particular tower from the Liverpool University and the St. Pancras, which is another Gothic type architecture building. You'll see this a lot in the steampunk. There's a lot of Gothic and there's a lot of spires and points, and everything is just really sharp in the steampunk. I don't really know why. It's just part of the aesthetic. It looks as if, and based on my research, this makes sense. Most steampunk kind of architecture really looks like they took medieval type architecture and then just built on top of it, which in world makes sense. I mean, you won't just build whole new cities every couple hundred years. So I got to play a lot around with the Gothic architecture here. So what I did for this building, and for all my buildings going forward, because I need them to fit into a specific place on our map for the Steam node, I went ahead and marked out those spaces you saw before using the terrain tools. And then I go through and I get measurements of them using individual walls for the length, the width, and the space that I have to work with so that I know the footprint that I have to fill. In this particular case, I needed a building that was long and skinny that would fit in next to the Phantom of the Opera dark ride and across from the Royal Albert Hall. So I built it out of brick, which is something you see a lot in Victorian architecture. There's a lot of brickwork being used. And I really wanted to emphasize those Gothic elements, so I went through and just kind of spiked everything up. By the way, in usual Pompkin King fashion, this build, of course, is sped up dramatically. I actually struggle a great deal with architecture. I'm not good at inventing architecture off the cuff, and I'm not really able to plan it out that well because I don't really draw perspective that well. So pretty much all of the buildings that I make for the steampunk node have to come out of my head, and really the only way for me to plan them out is to just build them outright. So that's what I do. And so it's a creative process, but it does take quite a while. This particular building is going to end up being a food court eventually, but it took me about a week to get this done. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 hours for this one building. So it does take quite a while. But I am overall very happy with the result. What I'm doing here is I am building a large umbrella dome section for this particular build. The dome is another thing that you'll see a lot in steampunk architecture. They have domes on all sorts of stuff. Largely, they're influenced, looks like, by like cathedrals that have the kinds of domes like the cathedral in Florence that has the big umbrella dome. They're also largely inspired by mosques, particularly the ones from Istanbul. So I didn't really make a dome like that per se, but I like the shape language of this particular dome and how it fits in with the spire on the front of the building. Here, I'm trying to make some smaller domes that would be attached to the outside, like porticos. It is difficult to get the correct distance so that when you rotate everything around, it actually fits and doesn't look weird. And I just have to kind of play around with that a little bit. And so you'll see several attempts where I tried to make that a thing and then, like, am not happy with the results, so I delete it and then do it again. Eventually, I end up just doing the dome separate from the building and then joining them together. I actually hadn't intended to keep the supports for this dome, but when I saw how it looked when it was fully rotated, I thought it looked pretty cool, so I decided to hold on to it. And I'm just going to slap on some lighting elements on the top for some more dramatic lighting once we get it into the actual Pure Imagination map, because I am on my building world right now, and then we'll be able to add that in. So all of these elements are built modularly. They all have their own separate blueprints. If you're interested, I will be posting those blueprints on the Steam warehouse. Just trying to build a tower here. I wanted it to be like octagonal so that it would fit the high Gothic medieval roofs that we have in the game. There we go. So hopping over to the Pure Imagination world now, we're going to go ahead and slap this in the space right here in between the Phantom of the Opera Dark Ride and the Royal Albert Hall. And the space actually works quite well for this because we're now in about the center of the node, which means that we can add those vertical elements without it being really overwhelming at the entrance, which is something that I wanted to avoid. Because although I do eventually want the Steam node to be kind of like a steampunk city, I wanted it to be so that you work your way into it, and I didn't want to be like too sharp a demarcation between the steampunk node and the horror node right across the street. So here it is. This is our completed food court building. And now we're just going to take some screen caps from a couple different angles and then dive on inside. So I filled the area with a few of these little food stands. I have a burrito stand, chow mein, I've got a gulpy soda and a Cosmic Cow milkshakes and some popcorn. And I also developed this lovely little sitting area here under the dome where people can come and eat. For whatever reason, guests don't seem to use this all that often, which is very strange to me. I'm still trying to figure out how the guest AI works for this game, but I'm very happy overall with the look of this build. So moving on, we're now going to be getting into the big project that I spent most of my week doing. This is going to be an airship docking port, and you have to use your imagination, some pure imagination, if you will. But what I imagine from this is that I want there to be like an airship transport ride that would take you from the steampunk node over to the city studio node on the opposite side of the bronchial. So city studio is going to be in node number 5, while steampunk is in node number 2. But just imagine how cool it would be to be able to get on like a transport ride where you get on an actual airship and fly over the top of the park. I think that would be so cool. I really wanted to take a page out of Disney's book and have as many different methods as possible to be able to go from one part of the park to the other without necessarily having to walk. Like, make the transport rides proper rides, so that you'd be able to use them to not only get around, but have fun and get those beautiful vistas. For this building, I had a lot of planning that went into it. I knew that it was going to be an 8x8 footprint, and I knew that I wanted it to be at least 16 wall segments high. It actually ended up being 18 and a half. So it is, as of now, the tallest building in the steampunk node. And then from there, I just kind of went around and improvised a lot of Gothic arches and tried to figure out a way to make it look as if this was a building that had function, besides just looking good. So up here, this is the actual dock for the airships. I'm just adding in some supports now. I struggled with this a little bit, so I ended up just putting in these red flashing lights as guidelines so that I could get the correct angles for the support. And I'm very happy overall with how it looks in the end. And then after I've got the supports established, I'm just going to go ahead and copy those over a couple of times and give the building the proper support that it needs for this airship dock. Now, we do have some very excellent airships that were entries in the Steam workshop. I will, of course, have a link in the description for all of the Steam workshop pieces that I use for Pure Imagination in the description. They are well worth checking it out. Some of these are really creative, and some of the airships in particular look chef's kiss, just absolutely beautiful. This is actually kind of a happy accident. I had originally planned to have a hot air balloon ride that would take you up over the top of the park. But when I decided that I was going to have the airship, I figure I could put the two of them together. So that hot air balloon, though a piece of scenery, is actually a functional ride, at least it is if you use your imagination, that would be able to lift you up so that you'd be able to get a really fantastic view well above everything else in the park so far, because the tower itself is 268 feet high, and the hot air balloon goes, I think, another something like 10 wall segments, so another 40 meters above that. So it's pretty high. Here I'm just adding in some supports for a walkway. This is actually going to be something that we're going to be working on in the future. I want there to be raised walkways around the steampunk node to add an extra layer of verticality to the build. Here's you get a good look at the food court that we built earlier. And I am going to have an interior to this airship building. I just don't know what to build yet. So if you have any suggestions, go ahead and leave me a comment as to what you'd like to see inside that airship building. But that's going to wrap it up for me today. If you enjoyed today's episode, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you'd like more of this Pure Imagination content, you can of course subscribe or support us on Patreon. But until next time, I am the Pompkin King, and I will see you next time.